In the heart of Kenya's central highlands, in the shadow of Mount Kenya, a boy was born in 1920 who would grow into one of Africa's most enduring symbols of resistance. His name was Dedan Kimathi Wakiri. To the British colonial authorities, he was a terrorist. To his people, he was a freedom fighter, a field marshal, and the embodiment of defiance. Kimathi's story is inseparable from the history of colonial Kenya. By the early 20th century, vast tracts of fertile land in the central highlands had been seized by white settlers. The Kikuyu, Embu, and Meru peoples were pushed into reserves, stripped of their ancestral lands, and forced into wage labor. The injustice of land alienation became the seed of rebellion. Kimathi himself was born into poverty. His father died before he was born, leaving his mother to raise him in hardship. Yet he was bright, excelling in school, particularly in English and poetry. He was also rebellious, often punished for indiscipline. That rebellious streak would later define his life. By the 1940s, Kimathi had joined the Kenya African Union, the political party that sought reforms under colonial rule. But he quickly grew disillusioned with peaceful petitions. He believed that only armed struggle could restore dignity and land to his people. As he once declared, "I don't lead terrorists, I lead Africans who want their self-government and land." God did not intend that one nation be ruled by another forever. Dedan Kimathi. The movement that came to be known as the Mau Mau was, in truth, the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. It was a clandestine, oath-bound movement that drew its strength from dispossessed peasants and workers. Members swore loyalty to the cause, binding themselves to secrecy and sacrifice. Kimathi rose quickly through the ranks. By 1953, he had become one of the movement's field marshals, establishing a formal military structure in the forests of Aberdare and Mount Kenya. He convened war councils, organized supply lines, and inspired fighters with his fiery oratory. He understood the cost of the struggle. He told his comrades, "The journey to freedom is full of sacrifices, tears, hunger, clothes full of lice, blood, and death." Dedan Kimathi. For Kimathi, this was not just a fight for Kenya. It was part of a continental struggle. He once said, "I consider myself a great African patriot, fighting not for the liberation of Kenya alone, but for East Africa and the rest of the continent." Dedan Kimathi. In October 1952, the British declared a state of emergency. The colonial government unleashed a brutal counterinsurgency campaign. Villages were burned, thousands were detained in camps, and executions became routine. The Mau Mau fighters, armed with little more than homemade guns, pangas, and stolen rifles, waged guerrilla war from the forests. They attacked settler farms, ambushed patrols, and punished collaborators. The British labeled them savages, but to many Kenyans, they were heroes. Kimathi's defiance became legendary. He was often seen in his leopard skin jacket, carrying a revolver, a symbol of his authority. He famously declared, "I would rather die on my legs than live on my knees." Dedan Kimathi. This phrase would echo across generations, becoming a rallying cry for freedom movements far beyond Kenya. By 1956, the Mau Mau were weakened. Thousands had been killed, and tens of thousands detained. Yet Kimathi remained at large, a symbol of resistance. The British devoted enormous resources to capturing him. On October 21, 1956, their hunt ended. Kimathi was shot in the leg and captured by colonial forces. The image of him, wounded and carried on a stretcher, was printed on thousands of leaflets and dropped from planes to demoralize the fighters. He was charged with possession of a revolver. The trial was swift. The colonial court sentenced him to death. Even in captivity, Kimathi's spirit was unbroken. On the eve of his execution, he wrote to a Catholic priest asking that his son be educated. His concern was not for himself, but for the future. On February 18, 1957, Dedan Kimathi was hanged at Kimathi prison. His body was buried in an unmarked grave, its location still unknown. At the time of his death, the British celebrated. They believed they had crushed the rebellion, but history would prove otherwise. The Mau Mau Uprising, though suppressed, had shaken the foundations of colonial rule. By 1963, Kenya was independent. Yet in the early years of independence, Kimathi's legacy was contested. Kenya's first president, Jomo Kenyatta, who had been imprisoned during the emergency, distanced himself from the Mau Mau. He sought reconciliation with former settlers and downplayed the role of armed struggle. For decades, Kimathi was not officially honored, but among ordinary Kenyans, his memory endured. Songs, poems, and oral histories kept his name alive. His words continued to inspire. We reject colonization in Kenya because it has turned us into slaves and beggars. Dedan Kimathi. It was not until 2003, under President Mwai Kibaki, that the Mau Mau were officially recognized as freedom fighters. In 2007, a bronze statue of Kimathi was unveiled in Nairobi depicting him in his leopard skin jacket, holding a rifle in one hand and a dagger in the other. Today, Dedan Kimathi is remembered as a martyr of African liberation. His struggle resonates not only in Kenya but across the continent. He symbolizes the price of freedom, the courage to resist, and the refusal to bow to oppression. Dedan Kimathi's life was short, just 36 years, but his impact was profound. He embodied the contradictions of resistance, a man both feared and revered, condemned as a terrorist, yet celebrated as a hero. His words still speak to us. The journey to freedom is full of sacrifices, tears, hunger, clothes full of lice, blood and death. And yet, through that sacrifice, Kenya was reborn. Kimathi's story reminds us that history is not written only in parliaments and treaties, but also in forests, in whispered oaths, in the courage of men and women who refuse to kneel. He died on the gallows, but his spirit endures. Dedan Kimathi, the Mau Mau leader and warrior, remains a symbol of defiance, a man who chose to die on his feet rather than live on his knees. Period.